Arthur Kensington, a man who measured his life in stock prices and skyscrapers, thought he held all the cards. When he slid the crisp, cream-colored envelope across the polished mahogany table to his wife, Helena, he expected tears, perhaps a plea. Inside were divorce papers, the final move in a game he thought he was winning. He saw her as a beautiful, passive part of his portfolio, an asset to be liquidated. What he didn't know was that the game had been over for months. The woman he was trying to discard had already checkmated him, and the queen she had used to do it was his very own company. This isn't just a story of a marriage ending. It's the story of an empire changing hands in the quietest, most brutal coup imaginable. The Kensington mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut wasn't a home. It was a statement. A sprawling limestone monument to success, its manicured lawns rolled down to the Long Island Sound with an air of indifferent perfection. Inside the silence was just as curated. It was a silence filled with the hum of a sub-zero refrigerator, the distant whisper of a central air system, and the heavy unspoken resentments of a 20-year marriage. Helena Caldwell Kensington lived in the heart of this silence. To the outside world, she was the epitome of grace and fortune. She chaired charity galas, her name etched onto the donor walls of museums and hospitals. She was flawlessly dressed, her smile practiced her presence, a calming, elegant accessory to her husband's explosive ambition. But inside, Helena was an archivist of slights, a librarian of dismissals. Arthur Kensington did not see a partner when he looked at his wife. He saw a legacy manager. He had married her when he was still a hungry wolf on Wall Street, and she a brilliant forensic accountant with a mind like a steel trap had been captivated by his drive. He'd told her she was too smart to be hunched over spreadsheets forever. "Be the face of our life, Lena," he'd cooed. "I'll build the empire, you make it beautiful." Seduced by the promise of a shared dream, she had agreed. She'd traded her career for his, her ambitions for their family. A family that consisted of 2 children, now grown and away at Ivy League universities, who only called when their trust fund disbursements were due. The empire Kensington Innovations had become a tech and logistics behemoth. Arthur was a celebrated titan, a king in the world of corporate warfare. And like any king, he had grown arrogant, careless. The dismissals became more frequent. At dinner parties, if she dared to offer an opinion on market trends, he'd pat her hand with a condescending smile. "My wife, the armchair CEO." He'd chuckle to the table, and she would feel the heat rise in her cheeks as the other guests offered polite, pitying smiles. He forgot she once had the ability to trace a single dollar through a labyrinth of 1,000 shell corporations. He forgot the mind he'd once claimed to admire. The first tremor of the earthquake came not as a shout, but as a scent, a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging faintly to the silk lapel of his tuxedo jacket after a late board meeting. It was a cloyingly sweet gardenia, a scent too young, too eager. Helena knew her own fragrance, a subtle complex scent of sandalwood and bergamot. This was an intruder. Then came the other signs, a trail of digital and physical breadcrumbs left by a man too arrogant to believe he could be caught. A credit card statement she reviewed for their household accountant showed a charge for a suite at the Baccarat Hotel in Manhattan on a night he was supposed to be in Chicago. There was a recurring charge for a high-end floral delivery service to a downtown address she didn't recognize. The final damning piece of evidence was an accident of modern technology. Their family iCloud account, which Arthur never bothered to understand, synced his photos to her iPad. One Tuesday morning, while sipping her tea and reviewing the gala seating chart, a new album appeared. Weekend Getaway. It contained 3 photos. One was a sunset over a tropical beach. The other 2 featured a smiling, bikini-clad young woman with bright red hair, her arm draped possessively around Arthur's shoulder. Helena recognized her instantly. Penelope Vance, a ruthlessly ambitious VP from the Kensington Innovations marketing department. In one photo, Penelope was wearing a delicate diamond necklace, the very one Helena had admired in a Tiffany's catalogue, which Arthur had dismissed as a bit gaudy for you, darling. The teacup in Helena's hand did not tremble. The gala seating chart did not blur through a haze of tears. The curated silence of the mansion was not broken by a scream. Instead, a profound and terrifying coldness settled over her. It was the same cold, clear focus she used to feel when she was closing in on a complex fraud case, the moment when all the chaotic pieces snapped into a single, ugly picture. Arthur had not just betrayed her. He had underestimated her. He had deemed her irrelevant. He had forgotten that the quiet, elegant woman who organized his life was the same person who had once dismantled the financial schemes of hardened criminals for a living. She stood up and walked to her study, the one room in the house that was truly hers, filled with books on financial history, market analysis, and corporate law volumes Arthur dismissed as her little hobbies. She closed the heavy oak door, the click of the latch sounding like a chambered round. The beautiful life Arthur had built for her was a cage, and he had just handed her the key. She wasn't going to just escape. She was going to dismantle the cage bar by bar and take the architect with it. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer. It was to a name Arthur hadn't heard her speak in almost 2 decades, David Chen, her former mentor and one of the most discreet and dangerous private wealth managers in the world. The war had begun, and only one side knew it. David Chen's office in Midtown Manhattan was the antithesis of Arthur Kensington's world. There were no panoramic views or chrome and glass monstrosities. It was a book-lined sanctuary on a quiet side street, smelling of old paper and freshly brewed tea. David, a man in his late 60s with kind eyes that missed nothing, greeted Helena not with pity, but with a knowing calm. "Helena," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "It has been too long. You look resolved." "I've been asleep for 20 years, David," she replied, sitting in the worn leather chair opposite his desk. Arthur just threw a glass of ice water in my face. She laid out the evidence of the affair with the dispassionate precision of an analyst presenting a report. The perfume, the credit card statements, the photographs. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't waver. The emotion was there, a white-hot core of fury deep inside her. But she had channeled it into pure, unadulterated purpose. David listened, his fingers steepled. When she finished, he didn't offer condolences. He asked a single question. "What is the objective?" "People will expect me to file for divorce, take a settlement and disappear." Helena said, her eyes hard. "They expect me to be the wronged wife. That is not the objective. I helped him build that company. My inheritance from my father provided the seed capital for his first major acquisition. I managed the books in the early years. I was his strategist and his partner, until he decided a beautiful hostess was more valuable. He is going to give me a settlement, yes. But it won't be the one he offers. It will be the entire company." David's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the only sign of his surprise. He leaned back. "Kensington Innovations is a publicly traded company. Helena. Arthur holds a 34% controlling stake. The rest is owned by institutions and the public. A hostile takeover is loud, expensive, and almost impossible to pull off unnoticed. I'm not interested in a hostile takeover, Helena corrected him. I'm interested in a silent one. I want to own his shares before he even knows they're for sale. David leaned forward, a flicker of the old mentor-protege dynamic reigniting in his eyes. That's impossible. His shares are registered. He'd be notified of any transfer. He trailed off as a distant memory surfaced. Unless... Wait. The pre-IPO structure. Dear God, you remember that? Helena smiled for the first time that day. It was a chilling, predatory smile. I remember every single comma, David. I helped him structure it. Before Kensington Innovations went public, it was a complex web of private entities. To protect his assets and minimize his tax burden, a younger, more paranoid Arthur, with Helena's expert guidance, had created an intricate system. The bulk of his personal stake wasn't held in his own name. It was vested in a series of offshore holding companies and irrevocable family trusts. This was standard practice for the ultra-wealthy. But there was one component Arthur had long since forgotten, a relic from a more aggressive, less regulated era. It was a small Cayman Islands-based entity named North Star Holdings. This entity held approximately 15% of Arthur's total stake in the form of preferred non-voting convertible shares. The key was their nature. They were structured almost like bearer bonds. Control was determined not by a public registry, but by possession of the controlling debentures of North Star itself, which were held by a law firm in Geneva. Arthur had set it up this way as an emergency ghost fund, a rainy day asset that was completely off the official books. He hadn't touched it or thought about it in over a decade, confident it was his secret ace in the hole. He told me he dissolved North Star after the IPO. David murmured, already turning to his computer. He lied. Helena stated simply, he kept it as his escape hatch. The annual maintenance fees are paid automatically from a sub-account in Zurich. He's forgotten the details, I'm certain of it. He's too focused on the daily stock price to think about the plumbing he installed 20 years ago. But the controlling proxy for North Star, it's not in his name. David's fingers flew across the keyboard. Who is it? It's in my maiden name. Helena, said the words, landing with the weight of cannonballs. Helena Caldwell. He did it as a sentimental gesture back when we were a team, a nod to the fact that my inheritance started it all. He told me it was romantic, our secret. He never bothered to change it. Why would he? He thinks Helena Caldwell ceased to exist the day I became Mrs. Kensington. David Chen went still. He looked at Helena, and for the first time saw past the elegant society wife to the master strategist beneath. She wasn't just planning a divorce. She was planning a corporate decapitation. The debentures in Geneva can be claimed by the named proxy. David said, slowly, the pieces falling into place. If you can prove you are Helena Caldwell, you can take control of North Star. And with it, 15% of his company. That's the opening shot, Helena said. But it's not enough. 15% makes me a major shareholder, but it doesn't give me control. I need more. I need to get to 35%, just enough to have the controlling interest. The other 19% of his shares are in a series of domestic trusts for the children, which he controls as the trustee, David countered. You can't touch those. I know Helena said, her gaze unwavering. So we buy the rest. Quietly. On the open market. We need another 20%. Helena. That would cost a fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars. The volume of trading would trigger alerts everywhere. Arthur would know in a day. Not if we do it slowly. Not if we use a dozen different brokers through a dozen different shell corporations. Not if each purchase is small enough to fly under the radar, disguised as routine institutional portfolio adjustments. It could take a year, maybe 2. But Arthur is arrogant. He watches his competitors, not the mundane trading logs. He won't see it coming. And the money? David asked gently. Helena's expression hardened. Over the years, Arthur has been generous. He's gifted me jewelry art, a portfolio of blue-chip stocks for my amusement. He sees them as trinkets. I see them as capital. The Monet in the sitting room, the Degas sculpture, the Graf diamond necklace he gave me for our 15th anniversary. It's all going to be liquidated. Every last piece of the gilded cage is going to be sold to buy the bars of a new one. For him. David Chen leaned back and let out a long, slow breath. He was looking at a ghost. The brilliant, fearless young analyst he had mentored years ago had returned, and she was about to orchestrate the most audacious personal and devastatingly effective corporate raid he had ever witnessed. "All right, Helena," he said, a glint of admiration in his eye. "Let's get you your company back." The campaign began not with a bang, but with a series of silent, almost imperceptible transactions that rippled across the globe. The first phase was securing North Star Holdings. Helena using her birth certificate and a passport in her maiden name she'd kept renewed for years. Out of a vague, prescient instinct, flew to Geneva with David Chen. The Swiss lawyers' men who operated with the emotionless precision of clockmakers reviewed the documents for the trust established 2 decades prior. After 2 days of painstaking verification, they transferred control of the North Star debentures to a newly created entity managed by David's firm. Just like that, with a few signatures on thick, watermarked paper in a quiet, wood-paneled room, Helena Caldwell secretly became the owner of 15% of Kensington Innovations. Arthur remained blissfully unaware. The second phase was the War of Whispers, a slow, methodical accumulation of shares on the open market. This was where Helena's dormant genius for forensic accounting truly reawakened. She and David didn't just buy stocks. They orchestrated a symphony of acquisitions designed to be invisible. It started with the liquidation of her assets. The Monet Vieux de Véteuil was sold through a private auction at Christie's in London to an anonymous Russian oligarch. The proceeds were wired not to New York, but to a newly established corporate account in Liechtenstein. The Graf diamond necklace, along with several other pieces of what Arthur called his trophies of affection, were discreetly sold to a consortium of jewelers in Antwerp. The money was routed through Dubai. Her personal stock portfolio, a collection of safe blue-chip stocks, was sold off in small, staggered blocks over 3 months. Each sale was a quiet act of rebellion, a dismantling of the life Arthur had built around her. As the moving van, disguised as a service vehicle for art restoration, pulled away from the mansion with the Monet, Helena felt a profound sense of lightness. She was no longer just the curator of Arthur's collection. She was the architect of his downfall. With a war chest of nearly $400 million, the buying began. David Chen activated a network of trusted brokers and fund managers from Singapore to Frankfurt. They created 12 shell corporations with innocuous names like Apex Consolidated Group and Maritime Logistics Partners. No single entity ever purchased more than a few thousand shares in a single day. The trades were timed to coincide with high-volume trading hours buried amongst the billions of dollars of daily transactions on the NASDAQ. Helena became a nocturnal creature. While Arthur slept soundly beside her, or more often was working late in the city, she would be in her study, bathed in the glow of multiple monitors. She tracked market fluctuations, algorithmic trading patterns, and institutional ownership reports. She learned the rhythms of her own husband's company from the outside in. She knew which pension funds were likely to rebalance their portfolios, and when allowing her proxies to buy up the shares they sold without raising red flags. She knew which hedge funds were engaged in short-term plays, and she would instruct her team to buy in the moment they cashed out. There were close calls that tested her nerve to its absolute limit. One morning at breakfast, Arthur was idly scrolling through the Wall Street Journal on his tablet. "Odd," he muttered more to himself than to her. "There's been a steady, almost imperceptible increase in our stocks trading volume over the last 6 months. No big blocks, just a constant hum of activity. Some analyst at Goldman thinks a competitor might be trying to build a toehold position." Helena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of serene indifference. "Is that something to worry about?" she asked carefully, pouring him more coffee. "Nah," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a pittance. Probably just a few pension funds in Europe diversifying. They don't have the guts or the capital to make a real play. Let them nibble. It keeps the price stable." He took a sip of coffee, completely oblivious to the fact that the pension funds in Europe were sitting right across from him. The deception extended to every corner of her life. She continued to plan charity dinners, attend gallery openings, and play the role of the perfect corporate wife. She would listen attentively as Arthur bragged about a new acquisition or complained about a regulatory headache, all the while knowing more about the granular details of his company's stock ownership than he did. The strain was immense. She lived a double life, her days filled with polite smiles and meaningless chatter, her nights consumed by a high-stakes financial conspiracy against the man sleeping in her bed. Penelope Vance became a more frequent presence, no longer just a scent on a jacket, but a name Arthur mentioned with increasing regularity. Penelope's team came up with a brilliant new marketing campaign, he'd say. "That girl's a real killer." Helena would smile and nod the word killer, taking on a different meaning in her mind. She used her fury at the affair as fuel, a cold, hard stone in her gut that kept her focused and ruthless. After 18 months of this painstaking, nerve-shredding work, David Chen called her for a secure meeting in the city. He slid a single sheet of paper across his desk. It was a simple pie chart. "There it is," he said quietly. "North Star. Holdings holds 15%. The 12 shell corporations combined hold 20.5%. As of this morning, Helena, you control 35.5% of Kensington Innovations. You have the controlling interest." Helena looked at the chart, the culmination of a year and a half of secrecy risk and cold rage. She hadn't just bought stocks. She had reclaimed her life one share at a time. The ghost in the machine now owned the machine. "He still thinks I'm just a line item in his life," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "An asset to be managed. An asset is exactly what you are," David replied with a thin smile. "He just doesn't realize you're the one who now determines his value." The war of whispers is over, Helena. What happens next? Helena looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, at the towers of glass and steel that represented the world Arthur thought he commanded. "Now," she said, her voice laced with ice, "we wait for him to make the first move. And when he does, we end it." Arthur Kensington chose to end his marriage in the same way he conducted his business, with a public display of power designed for maximum impact and humiliation. He didn't have the decency to tell her in the privacy of their cold, cavernous home. He did it at Le Celeste, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign where the bill for two could rival the monthly salary of one of his junior employees. It was their 21st wedding anniversary. Helena knew something was wrong the moment he suggested it. Arthur hadn't remembered their anniversary, without a reminder from his assistant, in at least a decade. He was unnaturally charming all evening, regaling her with stories of their early years, a cruel pantomime of a happy marriage. He ordered the vintage champagne she loved and toasted to new beginnings. Helena played her part, a swan gliding serenely across a lake, all the while paddling furiously beneath the surface. She wore a stunning navy blue dress, her hair swept up elegantly, and the sapphire earrings he'd given her long ago. She looked every bit the part of the adored wife, which she knew was exactly the image he wanted to project before shattering it. After the main course was cleared, he reached into his bespoke suit jacket. For a fleeting insane moment, she wondered if it might be a gift. Instead, he pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope from his inner pocket. It was from the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, a name synonymous with brutal corporate litigation. He slid it across the white linen tablecloth. It stopped just short of her wine glass. "Helena," he began, his voice taking on a tone of magnanimous sorrow, a performance for the nearby tables. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. We've had a wonderful run, truly. But we've grown apart. We want different things now. I think it's time we were both free to pursue our own happiness." She didn't touch the envelope. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Your happiness," she said, her voice steady, "looks a lot like Penelope Vance." Arthur had the grace to look momentarily surprised before his expression hardened. "My personal life is no longer your concern. I have been more than fair. Inside that envelope you'll find divorce papers and the terms of a very, very generous settlement." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. $50 million tax-free. The house in Greenwich. The apartment in Paris. You'll be set for life, Helena. You'll never have to worry about anything ever again. All you have to do is sign, and we can handle this with dignity, without a messy public fight. $50 million. To him it was a rounding error, the cost of surgically removing a past inconvenience. To him this was a golden parachute for the woman who had dedicated 2 decades of her life to him, whose own inheritance had been the seed from which his entire forest of wealth had grown. He was offering to buy her silence and her swift exit for a fraction of a percent of his net worth. It was the ultimate dismissal, the final confirmation that he saw her as nothing more than a retired employee to be pensioned off. She finally picked up the envelope, her fingers tracing the sharp edges. She felt the weight of the papers inside the legal ink that was meant to excise her from his life. For a full minute, she said nothing, the silence stretching uncomfortably between them. Arthur shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering slightly at her lack of a predictable reaction. He had expected tears, hysterics, perhaps a slapped face. He was prepared for a scene. He was not prepared for the calm, analytical gaze she fixed upon him. "Is that all?" she asked, her voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. "I think it's more than fair," he said defensively. "It's a hell of a lot more than any court would award you." "Fair," she repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. She looked around the opulent restaurant at the captains of industry and their beautifully preserved wives dining at other tables. She looked back at Arthur, at his handsome, confident face, the face of a man who had never been truly challenged, who had never conceived of losing. "You're right, Arthur," she said, and his shoulders relaxed, believing he had won. "We do want different things. You want a younger wife, a clean slate, and to keep your emperor intact." She paused, then gave him a small, cryptic smile. "I, on the other hand," she continued, "want the company." Arthur stared at her, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Don't be ridiculous, Helena. You're emotional. That's understandable. You'll have the best lawyers money can buy, but you're not touching the company. The prenup is ironclad, and my shares are untouchable." "Are they?" She asked, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine. She placed the unopened envelope back on the table, pushing it gently towards him. "This settlement offer is rejected," she said, her voice as crisp as the linen. "You see, you've made a critical error in your calculations. You're filing for divorce from your wife, assuming she is your dependent. But you should be filing for divorce from your majority shareholder." The color drained from Arthur's face. The confident smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then dawning horror. "What the hell are you talking about?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll have my lawyers send a response to yours in the morning," Helena said, gathering her clutch. She stood up, a portrait of composure and power. "They'll be in touch with the board of Kensington Innovations as well. I believe there's a protocol for when the CEO is in a legal conflict with the person who holds a 35.5% controlling stake. This should be interesting." She turned and walked away from the table without a backward glance. She could feel his eyes burning into her back, the stunned silence of a king who had just been informed in no uncertain terms that he had been deposed. He had planned a public execution of their marriage, and instead Helena had just handed him the notice of his own corporate demise. The porcelain execution had shattered in his hands, and he was just beginning to realize he was the one who was going to be cut by the shards. The emergency board meeting of Kensington Innovations was convened on a grey, drizzly Thursday, 2 weeks after the disastrous anniversary dinner. The atmosphere in the 50th floor boardroom was thick with tension and confusion. The 12 members of the board, powerful, shrewd men and women who managed billions in assets, had been summoned by a cryptic legal notice from an unknown entity, a consortium represented by the firm of Chen Wealth Management. The notice had cited a material conflict of interest involving the CEO and a majority shareholder, and had requested a vote of no confidence. Arthur Kensington stood at the head of the vast obsidian table, trying to project an aura of command he no longer felt. For the past 2 weeks, he had been in a state of controlled panic. His lawyers had confirmed the unthinkable, a series of shell corporations, their ownership obscured by layers of international law, had methodically acquired over 20% of the company's stock. Worse, they had confirmed that North Star Holdings, his forgotten offshore ace, was active, and its controlling interest had been legally claimed by one Helena Caldwell. He had stormed home and confronted her, demanding an explanation. She had simply looked at him with cold, dispassionate eyes and said, "All will be made clear in due course, Arthur. You wanted this to be handled by our lawyers. So be it." Now in the boardroom, he was facing the consequences. He addressed the board with forced bravado. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. We seem to be the target of a rather unorthodox and hostile corporate maneuver. I assure you my legal team is handling it. This is a frivolous action designed to disrupt our operations, likely by a competitor." He was interrupted by Robert Sterling, the lead independent director, a veteran of Wall Street with a face like a bulldog. "Arthur, my office received a dossier this morning. It details the acquisition of 20.5% of our stock by 12 separate entities over the last 18 months. It also contains documents showing that North Star Holdings, an entity you created, holds another 15%. According to this consortium now controls over 35% of this company. They are, for all intents and purposes, the majority shareholder, and we have no idea who they are. Just then the double doors of the boardroom opened. David Chen walked in, followed by 2 junior associates carrying briefcases. He was calm, impeccably dressed, and radiated an authority that immediately silenced the room. "Good morning," David said, his voice filling the space. "I am David Chen. I represent the consortium that has called this meeting." Arthur shot to his feet. "This is a private board meeting. You have no standing here." "On the contrary, Mr. Kensington," David said smoothly, placing a thick binder on the table. "I hold the proxy votes for 35.5% of this company's shares. I believe that gives me more standing than anyone else in this room. Please sit." Arthur, trembling with a mixture of rage and fear, slowly sat back down. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. David continued, addressing the board. "The consortium I represent has 2 primary concerns. First, the company's recent performance has shown signs of stagnation, with R&D spending down, and too much capital being diverted to flashy marketing campaigns with questionable ROI. He glanced meaningfully at a marketing budget report on the table, a report authored by Penelope Vance. Second, and more pressingly, we have a significant conflict of interest. The CEO, Mr. Kensington, has initiated divorce proceedings against the ultimate beneficial owner of this 35.5% stake. He is in effect using company resources and his position to wage a personal legal battle against the person who owns his company." A wave of shock rippled through the room. The members stared at Arthur, whose face had gone a ghastly shade of white. "This is an outrage," Arthur sputtered. "My personal life has no bearing on my ability to run this company." "Your personal life is about to become this company's single greatest liability," David countered coolly. "The beneficial owner is prepared to initiate a series of shareholder lawsuits that will tie this company up in litigation for years. She is prepared to vote her shares to block any and all strategic initiatives you propose, effectively paralyzing your leadership. She is prepared, in short, to protect her asset from a CEO she no longer trusts." Robert Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "For God's sake, Chen, who is it?" "Who is this owner?" David paused for dramatic effect. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single, notarized document. "The ultimate beneficial owner of the shares, held by North Star Holdings and the 12 affiliated corporations, is a single individual. The trust documents are quite clear. The sole beneficiary is Mrs. Helena Caldwell Kensington." If a bomb had gone off in the room, it would have been less shocking. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of Arthur Kensington making a strange, strangled noise in his throat. Every eye in the room swiveled from David to the document, and finally to Arthur, who looked as though he had been turned to stone. The man who prided himself on his vision on seeing 10 moves ahead in any negotiation had been completely and utterly blindsided. The wife he thought of as a decoration, the woman he was trying to cast aside with a pittance, was the shadowy corporate raider who had been hunting him for nearly 2 years. She wasn't a competitor. She was the woman who knew all his secrets, because she had helped him create them. "Therefore," David Chen continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "on behalf of the majority shareholder, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the CEO Arthur Kensington. We will be voting our 35.5% stake in favor of his removal. We will also be putting forth a new candidate for interim CEO, effective immediately, Helena Caldwell Kensington." The gambit was complete. Helena hadn't just taken his shares. She had used his own corporate governance rules, the very structure of the board he had assembled, as the weapon for his execution. The judgment delivered in the glass tower he had built was swift, brutal, and absolute. Arthur Kensington, the titan of industry, was about to be fired from his own company by the wife he had so fatally underestimated. That night, the Greenwich mansion was no longer a silent, curated space. It was a tomb, heavy with the suffocating atmosphere of utter defeat. Helena was in her study, not looking at stock tickers, but at a simple cup of chamomile tea when Arthur stormed in. His face was a mask of disbelief and apoplectic rage. His tie askew, his multi-thousand-dollar suit looking like a costume on a broken man. "How?" He bellowed, the sound raw and wounded. "How could you do this?" Helena looked up at him, her expression calm. The storm she had unleashed had finally reached her shore, but she was safely behind the seawall she had spent 2 years building. "You should be more specific, Arthur," she said, her voice even. "How did I acquire the shares? Or how could I, your dutiful wife, betray you like this?" "Both, all of it." He gestured wildly around the room. "This is my life, my company. You've destroyed me." "No," she corrected him, standing up to face him. She was no longer the shorter, deferential figure. In that moment, she seemed to tower over him. "You destroyed yourself. I just did the accounting." She began to walk slowly around the study, touching the spines of the books he had always ignored. "Let's start with the how. It began with North Star Holdings. Do you even remember creating it, Arthur? It was our secret, our just-in-case fund. You put the control proxy in my maiden name as a romantic gesture. That was your first mistake. You forgot that Helena Caldwell still existed. She moved to the window, looking out into the dark, manicured grounds. Then the money. I sold the Monet you bought to impress the Vanderbilts. I sold the diamonds you gave me to apologize for missing our 15th anniversary. Because you were in Aspen with your assistant. I sold every single trinket, every trophy of affection you used to placate me, to keep me quiet in our gilded cage. I liquidated my silence, Arthur, and I used it to buy my voice 1 share at a time." Arthur stared at her, speechless. The story was so audacious, so impossible, it sounded like a fantasy. "For 18 months, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "while you were having late meetings and weekend getaways, I was here. I was studying market trends, tracking trading algorithms, and orchestrating a global network of buyers. I learned the rhythm of the company you thought was yours. I knew its vulnerabilities better than you did, because you were too busy basking in the glory of being king to check if the castle walls were secure." His rage began to curdle into a pathetic, dawning comprehension. This wasn't a corporate action. It was a personal one. This was an act of vengeance, so meticulously planned and flawlessly executed, it defied belief. "Why?" He finally choked out the single word filled with a child's bewilderment. "Was it about the money? The settlement wasn't enough. You could have had more. You could have just asked for more." Helena turned from the window and laughed. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a cold, brittle sound like ice cracking. "Money," she said, walking towards him until she was standing just a few feet away. "You still don't get it. You think this is about money. This was never about the money, Arthur. It was about this." She pointed a finger at his chest. "It was about 20 years of you patting my head at dinner parties. It was about you dismissing my ideas, forgetting my birthday, and erasing the woman I was to make room for the accessory you wanted. It was about you handing me divorce papers at our anniversary dinner, as if you were firing a secretary." Her voice grew stronger, each word a hammer blow against his shattered ego. "You didn't just have an affair. You deemed me irrelevant. You, the great visionary, looked at me every day and saw nothing of value beyond my ability to host a party. That was your fatal mistake. Not the affair, not the arrogance, but the blindness." She stopped directly in front of him, her eyes locking onto his. "This isn't a corporate takeover. This is a correction, a balancing of the books that is 2 decades overdue. You built Kensington Innovations on my father's seed money and my financial strategies. I was a silent partner, you wrote out of the ledger. Well, the ledger is now corrected. The asset has been reassigned to its rightful owner. Arthur Kensington, the titan the king, finally broke. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. The fury was gone, replaced by the hollow emptiness of a man who had lost everything because he never understood what he had in the first place. He wasn't just broke, he was exposed. The world would soon know that he had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and utterly dismantled by the wife he had cast aside. His reputation, the only thing he valued more than his money, was in ashes. "What happens now?" he whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. "Now," Helena said, walking towards the door of the study, her sanctuary, her war room. "You will accept my settlement offer. It will be fair. You will not be destitute. But you will be gone. From the company, from this house, and from my life. And I will go to work on Monday morning as the CEO of my company." She paused at the door and looked back at the shell of the man who had been her husband. "The accounting is complete," she said, before closing the door softly behind her, leaving him alone in the ruins of the empire he once thought was his. The first day of Helena Caldwell, Kensington's tenure as CEO of Kensington Innovations, was met with a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and grudging respect on Wall Street. The story had exploded across the financial world, a modern-day corporate Greek tragedy. Arthur Kensington had been stripped of his power in the most humiliating way imaginable, a tale that was already becoming a legend, whispered in trading pits and exclusive country clubs. Helena arrived at the office not in a chauffeured town car, but in her own sedan, which she parked in the general employee garage. She walked through the lobby, her sensible heels clicking on the marble floor, offering polite good mornings to the stunned employees who stared at her as if she were an apparition. She was not the distant, smiling socialite from the society pages. She was a woman of purpose. Her expression focused her energy, radiating a quiet, formidable competence. Her first act was not to fire Arthur's loyalists or to redecorate the CEO's office. It was to call an all-hands meeting with the company's senior management and department heads. They gathered in the main auditorium, a nervous, uncertain crowd expecting a bloodbath. Helena walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the faces of the people who now worked for her. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the large room. "I know there are a lot of questions and uncertainty right now, so let me be direct. My name is Helena Caldwell. Many of you know me as the former wife of Arthur Kensington. But before that, I was a forensic accountant, and in the earliest days of this company, I was its first CFO. My roots in this company run as deep, if not deeper, than his. A murmur went through the crowd. Most had no idea about her background. "I am not here to dismantle Arthur Kensington's legacy," she continued, "but to correct its trajectory. For too long, this company has been driven by ego. It has chased headlines instead of sustainable growth. It has valued aggressive marketing over fundamental innovation. That ends today." Her eyes scanned the room, making contact with the heads of R&D, logistics, and engineering. Our focus returns to what made us great in the first place, building best-in-class products and creating the most efficient logistics networks in the world. We will be increasing our R&D budget by 30% effective next quarter. We will be investing in our people, in our infrastructure, and in our core technologies. We will become a company that values substance over style. She then turned her attention to the marketing department, where a pale-faced Penelope Vance was trying to make herself invisible in the third row. We will also be restructuring departments that have become bloated and inefficient. Helena said, her gaze lingering on Penelope for just a second too long. Performance ethics and a positive contribution to the company's bottom line will be the only metrics that matter. There will be no room for vanity projects or personal favorites. It was a declaration of a new era. Over the next 6 months, Helena proved she was not a fluke. She was a revelation. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of the company's finances and a keen intuitive understanding of its operations. She trimmed the fat-cutting, wasteful spending on projects external, like the corporate jets and extravagant client parties that Arthur had loved. She reinvested that capital into the company's core. She promoted a brilliant but overlooked female engineer to head the R&D department. She implemented a new logistics system based on a proposal that had been sitting on Arthur's desk, ignored for over a year. Morale, which had been flagging under Arthur's autocratic rule, began to soar. Employees felt heard and valued. The company, which had been stagnating, began to show real signs of a turnaround. The stock price, after an initial dip from the scandalous news, began a steady, confident climb, surpassing its previous highs. As for Arthur, he accepted Helena's settlement, a generous sum by any normal standard, but a pittance compared to what he had lost. It was enough for him to live comfortably, but not enough to ever be a player again. He was a ghost on Wall Street, a cautionary tale. Penelope Vance was one of the first to be let go in the restructuring, her golden parachute turning out to be made of lead. She disappeared from the scene as quickly as she had appeared. The divorce was finalized quietly, without the messy public battle Arthur had once threatened. In the end, he had no fight left in him. Helena legally reclaimed her maiden name, signing all corporate documents as Helena Caldwell. One evening, about a year after she had taken control, Helena stood in the CEO's office, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. The office was different now. The gaudy, monumental furniture Arthur had favored was gone, replaced with clean, functional pieces. The walls were adorned not with pictures of him shaking hands with celebrities, but with patent filings and architectural plans for new distribution centers. It wasn't his empire anymore. It was hers. She had not inherited it. She had not been given it. She had earned it through intelligence, patience, and a will of iron forged in the cold fire of betrayal. She had been the silent partner, the ghost in the machine. Now she was in the driver's seat, and the empire she was building was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever before. The Queen had taken the castle not by force, but by a brilliant, silent strategy that had left the king with nothing but his own stunning obsolescence. Helena Caldwell's story is a powerful testament to the fact that the most underestimated person in the room is often the most dangerous. It's a stunning reminder that true power isn't always loud and aggressive. Sometimes it's quiet, meticulous, and built in the shadows over years of patience and planning. She transformed years of dismissal and disrespect, not into bitterness, but into the fuel for an extraordinary corporate takeover. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her own legacy and built a better, more ethical empire on the ashes of her husband's arrogance. Hers is the ultimate story of strategy, resilience, and calculated justice. If Helena's incredible journey from a forgotten wife to a titan of industry captivated you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a story of epic triumph. And for more deep dives into the most dramatic real-life stories of power and intrigue, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. What was the most shocking twist for you? Thanks for listening.